I turned this $2 air filter into a $280 million a year business. That's $23 million a month. That's not luck or smarts or even hard work. It's just obsessiveness and understanding the frameworks that I'm going to show you in this video. So here's my complete business breakdown. The decisions that worked, the mistakes that cost me years, and what I do differently to reach this level even faster. At the end, I'll even show you the exact profit margins and numbers behind how Filterbuy actually makes money, including how much money I take home every month so that you can learn from a real business. The first thing you need to understand is a mistake that I made early on. If I didn't make this mistake, I would have gotten richer so much faster. If I wanted to make $1 million fast, I'd stop thinking. In 2015, I spoke at an e-commerce conference. I put up a slide with the Jeff Bezos quote saying, "Your margin is my opportunity." My response was, "Your complexity is my opportunity." That was my entire thesis. I believed that if I built something impossibly complex, integrating manufacturing, distribution, marketing, brand, fulfillment, logistics, I'd have a moat that nobody could cross. So that's exactly what I did with Filterbuy. I compressed everything into one vertically integrated business. Every function, every department, every aspect of the supply chain. I built complexity on purpose, and it worked. But here's what I tell you today. Complexity is the enemy of a good business. Doing simple things extraordinarily well is where real wealth lives. Think about losing weight. The formula is stupidly simple. Eat fewer calories than you burn. But most people fail because they're impatient. They want results in 2 weeks, not 2 years. My path worked because I'm stubborn and a glutton for punishment. But it was hard mode. And if you want to reach $23 million a month faster than I did, you need to understand what I do differently today. If I had to do it over, I'd take something simple, an HVAC company, a daycare, a plumbing business, and scale it geographically through systems and acquisitions. Simple business model, robust systems, geographic expansion. But that strategic mistake wasn't even the riskiest decision I made. The way I actually funded this whole thing was even crazier. Most people think that you need investors or a pile of cash to start a big business. I started with debt. I didn't start my business at zero. I started in the negative and bootstrapped my way out to $280 million. Here's how. I didn't start my business with venture capital. I borrowed money to buy a dying industrial supply business. I literally went from zero to negative and had to grow the business from there entirely through bootstrapping. To manage cash flow without any outside capital, I became an expert at using revolving credit card float. Here's how it worked. I put every possible business expense on credit cards and paid them off monthly to avoid interest. This did two things. First, it gave me 30 days of float to manage cash flow, which was critical when I was undercapitalized. Second, I generated a massive amount of credit card points that actually helped cover my personal expenses. That float strategy kept me alive in the early years when cash was always tight. No investors, no big loans, just credit card float and stubbornness. Most people think bootstrapping means having cash saved up. Real bootstrapping means getting creative with every dollar. The credit card float gave me breathing room. Those 30 days between when I spent money and when I had to pay it back allowed me to turn inventory and get customer payments before the bill came due. It's not glamorous. It's not what people talk about in business school, but it works if you're disciplined enough to pay it off every month and never carry a balance. Could someone bootstrapping today use credit card float without getting into dangerous debt? Absolutely, but credit card float is a tool, not a strategy. First, only use float for working capital, not long-term debts. I'm talking things like inventory, ads that convert, or expenses tied directly to revenue. Second, and this is critical, pay it off every month. If you can't clear the balance on every statement, you're already in trouble. Carrying interest kills the entire advantage. Third, know your timing. You should collect customer cash before the bill is due. If cash comes after, this model doesn't work. Remember, flow buys you time, not forgiveness. It works when you're disciplined. It destroys you when you're not. Use it to survive and grow. Never use it to pretend that you're profitable. That got me started, but staying alive for the next 8 years required an even bigger sacrifice. The most important number in my business isn't $23 million a month, it's the $50,000 a year salary I paid myself for 8 years while building it. I was doing $70 million in revenue and paying myself less than a teacher's salary. This was the best decision I ever made. From 2012 to 2020, I lived on a $50,000 a year salary from Filterbuy. That's it. By 2019, Filterbuy was doing $70 million in revenue. On paper, that looks massive, but we were showing maybe $700,000 in profit, and every single dollar went right back into inventory, equipment, and marketing. I didn't take my first real distribution from the business until 2020 when I needed a down payment on a house in Southampton. That was 8 years. 8 years of being all in, constantly worried about having enough cash to keep growing. For 8 years, I reinvested everything. Most people don't have that patience. Most entrepreneurs want to look successful before they are successful. They hit $1 million in revenue and immediately upgrade their lifestyle. New car, bigger house. They start taking distributions to fund a lifestyle they haven't actually earned yet. If you're growing 20 to 30% a year, you need cash to fund that growth. Inventory, equipment, and marketing. It all requires capital up front. If you're pulling money out, you're choking your own business. The only way I got to where Filterbuy is today was by living below my means and pouring everything back in. It took 8 years of patience. Think of cash like oxygen for a business. The more you pull out to live, the less room the business has to breathe. The way I think about it is that you first need to pay yourself just enough to live without resentment. Not to impress anyone, not to upgrade your lifestyle, just enough to stay focused. Second, be honest about what your business actually needs to grow. Things like inventory, marketing, equipment, additional headcount. If growth requires cash and you pull that cash out, you're choking the business. Third, understand this truth. The person who can delay gratification the longest usually wins. Amazon is the extreme example. They ran near break even for years to build the snowball. You start taking real money out after the business can fund growth and still throw off excess cash. That's when the snowball is rolling on its own. Until then, your job is simple. Live below your means and let the business compound. Living on $50,000 a year forced me to get creative. And one of the most creative things I did was something that most people would think was insane. I lost money on purpose. I lost money on purpose for years, and it's the only reason that I'm profitable today. Here's the problem. To manufacture air filters competitively, you need volume. But when you're starting out, you don't have volume. You might have decent revenue from online sales, but not enough units to get your costs down. So I did something counterintuitive. I took on wholesalers. I was selling filters by the truckload to a company in New Jersey. I'd manufacture a filter for $2 and sell it them for $2.30. 30 cents. That's it. I wasn't making money on those deals. In fact, I was losing money because I wasn't a good manufacturer yet. But I knew that the only way to get my costs down was to drive volume up. So I did it anyway. Fast forward to today. I can take that same $2 filter and sell it for $13 to an end customer. But I can only do that because I took the pain of building economies of scale over years. COVID accelerated it, but I would have gotten there regardless. This is why so many e-commerce businesses struggle. They're doing big sales numbers, maybe $50 million, $100 million in revenue, but the actual profit they're keeping is tiny. Even at $100 million a year, if you're growing, you're not producing much cash. You're funding inventory, funding growth, funding bigger marketing budgets. E-commerce is a difficult, cutthroat game. Jeff Bezos said, "Your margin is my opportunity," and that's exactly what happened. Margins got compressed. But we're really not an e-commerce company anymore. We're a logistics company that owns our own brand. That shift is what made us successful. Losing money is only smart if it's intentional. You need to understand your true unit economics first. What does this business earn in a steady state without growing spending? If you don't know that number, you're not making strategic losses, you're just guessing. Low margin or break-even work only makes sense if it's permanently lowering your future cost structure. For example, more volume leading to better pricing, which creates operational leverage. The moment that low margin work stops improving future margins, it stops being an investment. The key is to spend money to buy future cash flow, not to hide bad economics. We talk about this in other videos, but think like a capital allocator. Every dollar that you invest today should clearly increase the cash the business can generate tomorrow. Building volume was critical, but I had another advantage that saved me millions of dollars every single year. But most people would never think to do it. I pay $1,500 a month in Alabama for something that costs $50,000 in New Jersey. I started Filterbuy in Alabama because that's where I'm from, but that decision became a massive competitive advantage. During COVID, we got a 30,000 square foot facility in an old grocery store. It used to be called the Piggly Wiggly, so we call it the Pig. I was able to negotiate a long-term lease for $1,500 a month. To put that in perspective, if I were renting the same facility in New Jersey, I'd be paying roughly $50,000 a month. That's $585,000 a year versus $18,000 a year. I'm saving over $500,000 annually on just that one building. And that's not the only one. In Talladega, I've locked in probably 500,000 square feet of infrastructure through a combination of purchasing and strategic leasing at extremely low rates. Our building overhead is way cheaper than our competitors. That's money that we can spend on marketing and brand instead. Most people think about business backwards. They want to be in the big city where everything's expensive because that's where the action is. But for a business like mine, being in Alabama is a cheat code. Lower rent means higher margins. Higher margins means I can spend more on customer acquisition. More customer acquisition means faster growth. It compounds. And because we're shipping products nationally anyway, it doesn't matter where we're physically located. If your customers are not physically walking into your location, you should optimize for cost. Manufacturing, warehousing, fulfillment, back office services. These businesses benefit the most from low-cost areas because rent, labor, and utilities drop straight to the bottom line. Ask yourself one question. Does being in this city help me acquire customers or talent in a way that justifies the cost? If the answer is no, you're leaving money on the table. Geographic arbitrage is one of the quietest and most powerful margin levers in business. Before I tell you how I completely redefined my business, I want to redefine your business. Every week, I'm inviting boring business founders on my podcast, Boring Money. I'll help you spot the mistakes in your business that could save you millions. Send a message to the email on screen with a bit about your business, and I might see you soon. The next lesson was how I made logistics my unfair advantage. My biggest business expense isn't manufacturing, labor, or marketing. It's something that most people never think about. We spend about 20% of our revenue on shipping. That means for every $100 million in revenue, we're spending $20 million just on UPS or other carriers. Here's what blows my mind. What we pay to shipping carriers is more than the entire cost of running all of our manufacturing facilities, all of our manufacturing employees, and all of the raw materials combined. Shipping cost us more than making the product. That's when I realized we're not really an e-commerce company, we're a logistics company that happens to own our own brand. And by expanding to 8 locations across the country, we've optimized our shipping lanes so much that it becomes a moat. Smaller competitors can't match our shipping cost because they don't have the scale. Most people starting e-commerce businesses focus on the product or the marketing. They don't think about logistics until it's too late. But logistics is where you win or lose at scale. When you're doing $1 million a year, shipping might be 10% of your cost. When you're doing $250 million, if you haven't optimized it, shipping could kill your margins entirely. We've made logistics our competitive advantage, and that's why we continue growing. If you sell a physical product, you need to understand one thing early. What does it actually cost to get this product to the customer? Look at what the customer pays, then list every cost behind it. Product, packaging, storage, shipping. If shipping is a meaningful percentage of that price, logistics is no longer a detail, it's a lever. You don't need to over-optimize on day one, but once you cross roughly $1 to $5 million in revenue, you should start paying attention. That's when shipping starts to quietly eat margins. This is why the next lesson almost killed me. For 8 years, I was the CEO, CFO, CMO, and CTO of my company, and it nearly killed me. Until 3 or 4 years ago, I was effectively running every major function in the business. CEO, CFO, CMO, CTO. I didn't have any one of those seats because I was capital constrained. I couldn't afford to hire executives. When you don't have investors, you build a business by doing all the jobs yourself. And that's exactly what I did for the first 8 years. But over the last few years, I've hired a real management team. My COO came from Amazon. My CFO came from US Foods, a big big food distributor with a lot of similarities to what we do. My chief of staff has been helping me keep everything together. That allowed me to transition from living hand to mouth, just trying to survive, to running a real budget process where we view money as a strategic investment. Today, I spend my time on strategic planning, interviewing top talent, and solving the big problems the management team can't handle. Here's what changed. A CFO allows you to stop thinking like a scrappy entrepreneur and start thinking like an investor. Instead of scrambling for cash, you're allocating capital strategically. That mindset shift is what unlocks the next level of growth. I also learned that you need to pay people well. Early on, I underpaid people to save money. That was short-sighted. The turnover cost me more. Now, I pay people at the higher end of the range for their roles because I want them to stay. Align their incentives with business growth, and they'll help you build something real. You do not hire executives based on revenue, you hire them based on pain and complexity. The first executive hire usually makes sense when you're past $10 to $20 million in revenue, or you're making decisions that materially affect millions of dollars and you are the bottleneck. For most businesses, the first real hire is either a CFO or COO, someone who brings order, discipline, and systems. Pay a strong base salary so they're not distracted, but add performance-based bonuses tied to EBITDA improvement, cash flow, or operational metrics to make sure that incentives are aligned and everyone is sharing in the upside. Now that you understand all the decisions that got me here, let me show you the actual numbers. Here's how Filterbuy makes $23 million a month and exactly what margins we operate at. Now, before you start any business, you need to understand one simple equation, and most people skip this step entirely. There's a number every business in your industry hits, and if you can't hit it, you're dead. Here's how I think about profitability. Every industry has a benchmark. In HVAC service, a well-run service business should hit 20% margins. That means for every $1 million in revenue, you should take home about $200,000 in profit. For Filterbuy, in a steady state, we operate at about 15% margins. That means on $250 million in revenue, I'd expect about $37.5 million in profit. But we've been running at closer to 10% because we're reinvesting 5% back into growth, marketing, and infrastructure. Here's how it breaks down. We keep 40% after product and shipping cost. We spend 15% on marketing. We spend 10% on overhead like finance, customer service, rent, and insurance. That leaves about 15% profit. That's roughly $2 million a month, which I can then choose to invest in new initiatives to continue to grow the Filterbuy brand or buy other boring businesses. Okay, but how do you use that to start a business? The key is to reverse engineer this before you start. You need to know what margins are realistic in your industry. If you can't hit those margins, you don't have a business. Don't waste your time. How do you find out? Ask AI. Interview people in the industry. Talk to employees at competitors. They often know the financials. Then reverse engineer your entire business model around hitting that target. If you can't get there on paper, you definitely can't get there in real life. Now that you've seen how I built a $23 million a month business, the real question is what businesses actually make this repeatable. Click this next video to see the best boring businesses to start in 2026 if you want a real shot at building wealth.